everybody, welcome to another video. Today is the 3rd of March, and today we're going to be talking about the entire Bakhmut cauldron. And again, as the title says, this is mainly about the Ukrainian withdrawal from eastern Bakhmut, although I will also focus a lot on the flanks and talk about the broader situation and how the Battle of Bakhmut may come to an end. Let's begin by talking about the southern flank, which I would call the area where Ukraine is having the most favorable situation right now, obviously relative to all the other parts of the cauldron, because Ukraine does have a pretty large troop concentration in the town of Ivanivske. This was done due to the fact that the Ukrainians, they had noticed a threat of the Wagner assault detachments as they were advancing through the forests to the south of Ivanivske. So they sent a lot of reinforcements into this specific direction. And as a result, they were able to push back the Wagner group, especially some of their forward positions. And since then, we really haven't seen any sort of advance by the Wagner group towards the T-0504 highway. Although that's not really an issue because one of the roads across the canal on the T-0504 is destroyed. But the road can still be used to link up with other minor roads. As you can see over here, this road can be used to link up with paths that link up to Chasiv. If you let me draw it actually. So you see here, this is the T-0504 road, links up through the forest into Chasiv. It could also go through here and get into Chasiv. It could also link up with some minor roads that go in the direction of the Chromové road and then go into Chasiv. So again, Ivanivske is important. It is a logistical hub for the Ukrainians, and that's why there is a high troop concentration. Nonetheless, the Wagner group has resumed assaults in this direction, taking over some of the forested areas to the south of Ivanivske, retaking those positions actually. But we have seen some Ukrainian local counterattacks, and many of these have been carried out by the Ukrainian unit of IDAR, the 24th Separate Assault Battalion, which previously I had marked in Bahamut, but given the fact that they're now fighting on the flanks, I have moved them out, which means that they are safe from any sort of encirclement. And this is the case with a lot of units that I'm going to get into in the rest of the video. But the more important part of the southern flank, I would say, is what's going on around this forested area and the farmland, because you see how the Russians have just totally bypassed the Ukrainian fortifications in the farmland area. They just passed through this forested area over here and use those positions to break through into the rural dachas just to the east of the farmland. And now they are incredibly close to reaching the T-0504 highway and cutting it off at this really vital checkpoint. And doing this would render any sort of resupply or any sort of retreat from Ivanivske impossible. It will also isolate whatever Ukrainian forces are still in this farmland trying to hold on to their front line forward positions in the trenches. So it is important for Russia to really reach this point, this bottleneck, and it is a threat for Ukraine. Now, in this area, the Russians have also advanced towards this parking lot. They've advanced into the Mariupolske cemetery, where the Ukrainians had been holding out for a pretty long time. They also ended up reaching some of the residential blocks, which is a first because they'd really just been around the open fields for many weeks, but now they've actually been able to penetrate the Ukrainian lines. And so now we're seeing really street-to-street fighting in this specific area. And you can see how as time has passed, gradually the Wagner group has been able to take over more and more of these blocks, but it is a step-by-step process. They were able to take over this entire southern section of Bakhmut that is connected to Opitny. And so now the goal for the Russians in this section that I'm going to circle is to link up with the Wagner group forces in garrison on the eastern side of the Bakhmutov River. If they could link around this road over here, which I'm pretty sure is destroyed anyway, but if they could find a way to link up, then it would make their any sort of assault that they conduct much more effective. And it would also lead to some sort of flanking maneuver, which would be difficult for the depleted manpower of the Ukrainian defenders to counter. In terms of the units that are operating in southern Bakhmut, a lot of them have been moved out. You have the 71st Jaeger Brigade I have no idea where they're located at the moment. 2 weeks ago, they had a video that was geolocated of them striking Russian targets in southern Bakhmut around here. So it is possible that they're still in southern Bakhmut, but given the fact that it is a Jaeger brigade and that it is a pretty strong unit within the Ukrainian army, I would expect them to be one of the first units to retreat. So maybe they're not even in the city anymore, but we don't have any recent updates about their location, so I can't say for sure. Units that we do know are still in Bakhmut include the Georgian Legion. There was a video posted earlier today from really just a single squad of the Georgian Legion, where they were saying that they're just going to stay until the end and defend Bakhmut for as long as possible. You can see the Georgian patches, and these are volunteers. A lot of them are actually pretty battle-hardened because they fought not only in Donbass, but also fought throughout the duration of this entire war, so they may actually have a pretty good fighting capability. And so, yeah, they're going to stay behind as most of the Ukraine's regular army retreats, although there are some notable exceptions. And also, in regards to the Chechen units, I have no idea where they are, but given the fact that they were previously in southern Bakhmut, there is a possibility that they're going to do the same thing as the Chechen units and hold on and just sort of hold the line along the Bakhmutov River just to buy enough time for the rest of the Ukrainian army to retreat. So we're going to have to see if that happens. Now, let's move on to the eastern part of Bakhmut because this is what the video is about. So we know that the front line had really been closing in and that the Ukrainians had been forced to retreat closer and closer to the bank of the river, which is around here, you can say. And now they've actually went through with it and retreated across the river. The interesting thing is that there really aren't any crossings left across the river. You see over here, there is a river crossing that was destroyed by the Russians. And then there's another one here that was a rail bridge. In theory, could have been used by infantrymen to just cross across the river. But that was also destroyed. And presumably by the Ukrainians, actually, they mined it and destroyed it after they completed their withdrawal. So basically, all the crossings are destroyed. This one is also destroyed from really a while ago, so there's no way to get from eastern to western Bakhmut through a built structure. So most of them probably retreated maybe on foot across the river. Maybe some of them had a boat or something, or maybe some makeshift bridge, pontoon bridge. I don't know if they've had time or even the materials to do such a thing. Either way, it does imply that the Ukrainian forces on the eastern side of Bakhmut were relatively small in size if they were able to conduct a retreat like that without having to even use more than one bridge, this rail bridge. And now we know that the Wagner group is beginning to clear out this eastern district. They don't actually have full control of it yet because they're not actually taking up positions in every single house along the bank of the river. But for all intents and purposes, they are basically coalescing their control over this area, which includes the entirety of the Bakhmutka district, in the entirety of the Mias Kombinat district. Mias Kombinat is in the north, and then Bakhmutka is in the south. And the reason why this ended up happening is because the Russians, for months now, they've been trying to close in on the Ukrainian formations in the east from several axes. One has been from the north, where they've been pushing for a while. One has been just head on from the east through the industrial district, through this forested area over here. And then there was also the axis from the Bakhmut garbage dump. If you remember, I made a video about that. I think it was like 2-3 months ago. And I was talking about how that would give Russia an advantageous position to enter the first residential blocks within Bakhmut and clear them out. And that's basically what they did. Although it took them a long time, now they've been able to pressure the Ukrainians enough to make them retreat. Really, what added to Ukraine's difficulties on the eastern part of Bakhmut is the fact that the supply situation was very difficult. It's very hard to cross a river, especially when the crossings are all getting destroyed. The Russians have an artillery advantage and they have drones flying over. They could pretty accurately pinpoint some Ukrainian forces that would be transporting supplies, especially in this open area along the bank of the river. You don't want to be stationed open in this field because you'll probably be decimated by either side if you're standing in that area. And so supplying the Ukrainian forces in this area was difficult. And another issue that really broke the straw that broke the camel's back, actually, is the fact that the Wagner Group was able to break through at one point along the Bakhmut defense line, and they were able to take over several street blocks, and this created sort of wedge in between the Ukrainian formations in the north that were centered around the central part of eastern Bakhmut and the ones in the south that were in the less dense part of the district. And so this posed a threat of basically dividing and conquering, isolating two different parts of the Ukrainian formation, and then destroying both of them. That's really when the withdrawal began in full scale. And really, another issue is that at that point, the Ukrainians had to withdraw from a lot of these high-rise buildings over here. You see the ones over here that I'm going to mark right now. These are some pretty large apartment buildings. Some of them are also like facilities, like schools and stores and other such things, but they're like 4 or 5 stories high. And it gives you a pretty good view of the rest of the eastern Bakhmut districts, and especially the open fields along the riverbank. So you don't want to be situated over there. So that's part of why they crossed over. Also, once you cross over, there's a lot of better, more fortified positions that are closer to the Ukrainian, like rest of the Ukrainian command and the rest of the Ukrainian military formations, like in the center over here. You have these huge facilities that I'm going to talk about later. So it's just better to set up positions over there at that point. They did their part, the Ukrainian forces in the east, holding on for as long as possible. But yeah, they were forced to retreat, and that includes the Ukrainian units in the meat processing plant. I had a feeling that they may have tried to resist because this facility is pretty well fortified, and there are some underground tunnels that connected to the Azom district in Bakhmut. The Azom district is this one over here. So I expected some sort of resistance, but given the fact that the Russians were closing in on 3 sides on the meat processing plant, I guess it made sense for the Ukrainians to just retreat before they got totally destroyed. Now, here we have the situation in northern Bakhmut. We know that the Wagner Group and some VDV elements were able to secure the northern part of Bakhmut, including the Stupki district. So using these positions, they didn't want to advance head-on through the open fields into the Azom district, which is, again, it is a pretty advantageous position because there are such huge buildings over there and huge facilities to fire upon advancing forces. So instead, they attacked the Ilanovka district, which is just a residential district with not really any apartment buildings, just like 1-story houses. And so they were able to take over most of that district, and they also took over the rural suburb just to the southwest of it. And so this gives now, again, the Wagner Group an opportunity to flank the Azom district and attack it from a different direction where the Ukrainians hadn't really been prepared for that. In terms of the situation in Kromove, the Ukrainians have actually held on to it, and we haven't seen any sort of Russian gain in that direction since the last video. Assuming that they're just trying to hold on for as long as possible at this point. So they're probably throwing whatever reinforcements they have in this direction to prevent Russia from reaching Kromove, because once they do, it is basically checkmate, because Kromove is, again, such a vital supply line, which does connect with Ivanivske through several minor roads. Look at this path over here. This is the last road to Bakhmut, at least the last major one besides the one in Ivanivske, the T0506 road. And see what happened to it. This is a river crossing that is connected to that road, and it was destroyed. I think it was either today or yesterday. And what this means is that there's no way for Ukraine to actually use the main road from Kromove to Chasiv Yar, this one over here that I've been talking about for so long. So what are they going to have to do? They're going to have to use some of the minor roads that still go through Kromove, but not through the main road. So you see there are some that go like this, and then they link up with Ivanivske, and then from there they can reach Bakhmut, or Chasiv Yar. But again, this just means that Kromove itself is still extremely important, and the Russians are very close to cutting it off. Even if they don't physically cut it off yet, they are within firing distance, obviously, of the town. And so any sort of large convoys going through here, together would be a obvious target for Russian artillery. So there will be losses, and there probably have been many losses in the retreats that we've seen so far. Because, yeah, a lot of Ukrainian forces have already retreated. I'm going to go through them right now. You have, for instance, Birds of Magyar, which is an air reconnaissance group that has been fighting on the front lines of Bakhmut. One of the best units, actually, because of their structure that really relies a lot around these smaller scale quadcopter drones that are able to do recon and then sabotage tasks, and they work in tandem with Ukrainian artillery. That unit, they retreated on March 2nd of just yesterday, actually. And another unit that retreated was the 241st Territorial Defense Brigade, which is one of the units that has been really the most active in the fighting, especially in eastern Bakhmut. But now they've been withdrawn around the Chasiv Yar area. They were one of the last units to actually use the T-0506 road before it was destroyed, either by the Russians or the Ukrainians. I don't actually know, but it does seem like it was Russian shelling. Could have also been demining, but I don't know why they would have wanted to destroy their own crossing before they completed the total retreat. Either way, we also have the 57th Motorized Brigade. Their status is unknown in terms of where exactly they're fighting, but we do know they're still in the general Bakhmut area because one company from the brigade did post a video recently where they were complaining about a high amount of casualties within the unit. So they're still somewhere on the front lines over here. They're one of Ukraine's better units, I would say. Fought in Kherson, fought in Bakhmut for a while. If there is a retreat, if there's another retreat from Bakhmut, then they're going to be one of the first units to withdraw out of the ones that are still remaining out of this pool. We also have the smaller scale units that aren't exactly a part of the regular Ukrainian army structure, like some of these regiments. You have the National Guard Brigade and also the Spartan Brigade, which is a part of the National Guard, these intelligence battalions. And then you have, obviously, those foreign legions. All of them, they're probably staying on. Some of them are volunteers. Some of them are like more like special forces or DRGs. They're just holding on, and they have some like unique fighting capabilities that are better for this sort of battlefield and just holding back Russian assaults. But an interesting choice for the Ukrainians to really keep on the front lines has been the 93rd Mechanized Brigade. This has been one of Ukraine's best units throughout the entire war. Fought very well in the Kharkiv counteroffensive. Fought very well in Bakhmut as well, I would say. But they did incur very heavy casualties. And they were actually rotated out of Bakhmut. I think it was to Chernihiv where they were sent back, but then they were rotated back in because there was a lack of manpower. And so now they're one of the last remaining actually regular Ukrainian army units to stay in Bakhmut. And we have seen videos from officers within the brigade where they're talking about how they're still in the city and that they're going to defend it. So this implies that they may be one of the units that holds on to this front line along the river for as long as possible. They, given their experience, may have that capability, and they will just provide cover as the rest of the Ukrainian formations that are able to retreat do so in the most organized manner possible. I would also expect that there would be some territorial defense units that are involved in holding up the Russians, but we don't exactly know which territorial defense units are here. Some of them have forces that are stationed actually in their home cities, like Kiev or Chernihiv, Sumy, Zhytomyr. And then they have several smaller battalions that were sent to the front lines in Bakhmut. That's the case with the 120th Detached Territorial Defense Brigade. They have videos on Facebook of them fighting in like the forest in northern Ukraine, just training for a Russian invasion from there. And then we also have reports they're fighting in Bakhmut. So the only solution would be that they have some battalions operating within Bakhmut. And I'm sure that those will be part of the Ukrainian formation that tries to hold on for as long as possible. And then at the same time, you have the Ukrainian formations that retreated. A lot of them were able to retreat. I wouldn't say it was intact though, because so many of them died on the way back. A lot of different vehicles were destroyed, infantry fighting vehicles, armored personnel carriers, as they tried to retreat from Bakhmut through the crossings. Some of them got bogged down because the roads really aren't the best, and a lot of them they just sort of like the roads, they aren't capable of all the load from some of the tanks and such, especially like the dirt roads and the gravel roads. So no, it's not really good. A lot of the tracks, they might get damaged. They might get stuck in some sort of mound. So that is an issue, obviously, especially in such a high intensity situation where the Russians may be trying to fire you live as you're retreating. So it is a big issue. But yeah, you do have a lot of units that were able to retreat, and I do see them trying to reorganize around Chasiv Yar. Really, Ukraine's best case scenario now is just holding on to the flanks and holding on to the front line around the river as long as possible as they continue to retreat, and hold on to the supply lines and try to do so in the most organized way possible. That would be their best case scenario. And then the best case scenario for the Russians would be to quickly take control of key points like supply lines in Kromove and around Ivanivske, or in the bottleneck that I was talking about before. And then from there, they would try to isolate the remaining Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut. And then it would turn into a Mariupol-style situation. And in terms of manpower, there are less Ukrainian troops in Bakhmut at the moment than there were in Mariupol. If I had to guess, given the scale of the retreat of the Ukrainians now, there's only about maybe 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, maybe 5,000 maximum Ukrainian forces in Bakhmut. And so they will obviously still try to put up some resistance, but given the fact that they're going to be isolated, it's going to be futile. The best they can do is just try to hold up the Russians as Ukrainians try to reorganize a defense around the water canal, as I've been talking about for a while. So those are the that would be the Russian best case scenario, if they can just envelop them and totally crush them, which is what Wagner did in Soledar, by the way. When there were those 400 fighters that were isolated, the Wagner group was able to, after the ultimatums for surrender were rejected, they were able to get there into the center of the salt mines and kill a lot of the resisting forces, really without much mercy, which is what we saw the Russians do in Mariupol. They held out for months, and the Russians offered numerous surrender proposals, and eventually they agreed. But with the Wagner group, they were able to surround a smaller force, admittedly, and they just wiped them out after they refused to surrender. So if that turns into a situation in Bakhmut, given the fact that the Wagner group is the main fighting force in the area, you could see something like that happen. So again, that is just the Russian best case scenario. But anyway, thank you guys for watching, and